Great, thanks, Carla. So my name is Liv Dietrich. I'm with the Institute for Broadening Participation. We are a nonprofit organization, and we are funded by NSF and NASA and others to connect students with STEM opportunities and in general to help students progress into a STEM career. So we're excited to have this webinar today. What I'm going to do is start off with a brief kind of 10-minute overview of the topic, preparing and applying for a postdoc position. I'll do a brief tour of our website, which is pathwaystoscience.org, and is a great place to look for both postdoctoral placements but also portable fellowships. And then I'm going to pass it off to our two guest speakers. We have Dr. Cindy Layton, who is a current postdoc at Stony Brook University, and also Dr. Herbert Geller, who is with the NIH and has a lot of experience mentoring and supervising postdocs. Right now I'm going to share my desktop. This graphic is called Concept Map. It's just kind of another way to do a presentation, but kind of the important thing to know about this map is that we're going to make it available online. I'll send you a link to it after the webinar, and each concept or each shape on the map has kind of associated resources. So if you click on this little book icon, you'll see that there are attachments, which are PDF handouts, for example, applying for a postdoc position, how to position yourself for a positive experience. So these are great resources that I would encourage you to check out when you receive the link after the webinar is over. But I'll just launch in here and do a quick overview, just kind of starting out with the basics of what is a postdoc position. And it's really, it's a position for the purpose of gaining, scientific and technical and other professional skills that will advance your STEM professional career. It's temporary in nature, usually lasting, 1 to maybe a few years, depending on your discipline and the specific type of position. But of course, the heart of a postdoc position is full-time research. So a postdoc position should be giving you the opportunity to do in-depth research, to gain new research skills and knowledge, and also to publish and present on your research findings. Some postdoc positions do also provide other types of professional development support, and even possibly some teaching and mentoring experience, but the research, of course, is the major focus. And through that, ideally, your postdoc position is going to give you some experience also in grant writing and publication skills under the advisement of your postdoc mentor, as well as your sort of presentation and dissemination skills, so your ability to go out and represent your lab, your research team, your home institution by presenting your research findings at professional conferences and, in published findings. And then in some postdoc positions, you may have a role in terms of supervising other members of the lab, and sort of less commonly, some postdoc positions might involve opportunities for teaching and mentoring. But these are really kind of an apprenticeship in preparation for your full-time career as a STEM researcher. And so, it sounds like most of you are graduate students looking ahead to a postdoc position, and so probably one of the major questions you're asking is, is it for me? And so, in many fields of science, especially kind of the life sciences and physics and chemistry, a postdoc is basically a prerequisite if you want to go on to have a research career in that field. In other disciplines, that may not be the case. So one of the first things that you might want to do is to talk to your current advisor, other faculty members in your department, fellow graduate school students around you, and just kind of get a feel for the value of a postdoc position in your field and for your specific career goals. Depending upon what you want to do with your career, the emphasis on research, the postdoc position may or may not be the best way to advance your career goals. And of course, since a postdoc position is focused on research, you really want to ask yourself if you have that, that zest, that passion for research that will keep you happy in potentially a multi-year postdoc placement. And there are a few different types of postdoc positions available. there are, postdoc positions that are basically working under the grant of a principal investigator. So you are essentially employed to work on that faculty member's funded research project. There are also positions through federal agencies, which some provide sort of portable postdoctoral fellowships, which you could think as somewhat the equivalent of a graduate fellowship, where you receive funding to go to any accredited institution or lab to do your research. And also some federal labs host postdoctoral positions themselves as well. Private foundations are another place where you can look for both postdoctoral positions and those portable postdoctoral fellowships, as well as industry. So there are many places to look. In terms of preparing to apply, of course, one of the most important things is to apply early. This is probably something you've heard throughout your educational career at this point. One of the beginning points is to decide yourself what your career goals are, and then what the skills and knowledge and experience that you need to achieve to get to meet your goals. And once you have set those kind of career goals and expectations, then you can really assess how a postdoc position can help you achieve those goals, and that will really help you prioritize your applications based on what each specific postdoc opening is likely to provide you in terms of furthering your skills and your networking and all that. And networking really is important as you're looking ahead to a postdoc position. Many positions are filled before they're advertised through networking. So even as an early graduate student, it's never too early to start making those connections that might eventually evolve into a postdoc position. So you can express your interest in potential postdoc positions to faculty you meet, for example, at professional conferences. You should definitely try to talk to current postdocs from various labs about their experiences and what they're doing, who their advisors are, and really strive to make research connections outside of your university if possible, even while you're still a graduate student. It's great to talk to potential advisors, postdoc advisors, about your interest in a future postdoc position, even if that's, a fair ways into the future. Talk to current postdocs about their experience with different advisors, and just try to start getting a feel for who you might want to work with, who you think you'd work well with, and what different folks are doing. And, of course, that involves talking to current and former lab members and just asking things like, are they happy? Are they publishing? Do they have recommendations for who might be a good fit for you in terms of a potential advisor? I've mentioned that there are portable fellowships at the postdoctoral level, and what I'll do is in a minute here, I'll give a brief tour of our website where you can search for those fellowships. That's a great way to start looking for funding. And then, just practically creating a calendar of deadlines and action items to keep yourself organized and on task is, of course, always important. As you're exploring different specific postdoctoral openings, there are definitely some questions that you can ask that can help you assess whether, that position is for you. One is, you can ask the mentor or the sponsor for that position what their expectations are for that position, what their benchmarks are for a successful postdoctoral experience, what their goals are for that postdoc. Your postdoc advisor will be really critical to your success and happiness in that placement. And so trying to assess kind of what their advising style is and whether that syncs with what your style and your needs are is important. Think about not just your advisor's kind of prestige, but also their mentoring skills and the amount of time they're likely to have for you. If you can, it's great to arrange a personal meeting with the potential advisor, or at least some phone calls. And be sure to try, if you can, to talk to other postdocs who've worked with that advisor and kind of get their perspective on things as well. And it's good also to ask if you're likely to have kind of just a single mentor or advisor, or if you might have more of a committee and group of mentors, and how that, how you feel about that and how that's going to work with your learning style. Other questions that you can ask are things like whether there are career planning assistance type of available through that position, if there are travel funds available, and of course, the basics of sort of salary and that sort of thing are all great questions to ask as you're assessing a position. You want to get a sense for the types of new skills that you'll likely be gaining through the position, because of course you're wanting to advance your skills and your knowledge. And as well as, you want to kind of know, are you going to be the only postdoc in the lab, or will there be a group of postdocs? Who will you be working with? And in general, just kind of the university structure and policy related to postdocs, which is variable across different institutions. Some institutions treat postdocs as employees and some don't, and compensation and benefit packages can vary quite a bit. So it's good to ask kind of the details there. And then finally, if mentoring and teaching opportunities are important to you, you certainly want to ask about whether that is an option with the position that you're considering. So that's kind of like the brief whirlwind overview, because I wanted to allow plenty of time for our guest speakers. And before I pass it off to our first guest speaker, I do just want to give a quick tour of our website, pathwaystoscience.org, because it is a good resource for getting started with searching, especially for the fellowships. So if you just visit our kind of program search page, you can do a basic search. And I'm going to choose postdoc and early career as the level and just do a basic search here. You'll see there are 187 results, and this is a mix of actual postdoctoral openings and kind of the portable fellowships, which are kind of denoted with the little suitcase icon. If you wanted to focus in just on those fellowships, you could do an advanced search. Again, you're going to choose the postdoc level. And then down here, a little bit further down the page, you can choose to only look at the portable funding options, which are the fellowships options. Oops, sorry about that. And you'll see we have 14 of those listed on the site. So this is a good place just to start getting a feel for what might be out there. The other thing that I quickly wanted to show you before I pass it off is we have this webinar archives page, and we have two other postdoc topics here, and you could watch the video if you're interested in them. One is negotiating your position, and the other is once you're in the position, once you've secured a position, making the most of your postdoc position. So those are there for your reference. But at this point, I'd like to pass it off to our first guest speaker, who is Dr. Cindy Layton, and she's a current postdoc right now at Stony Brook. And I'm going to bring up the PowerPoint. And Cindy, you can just let me know when you'd like me to advance the slides.
Sure, that sounds good. So thank you so much for the invitation to talk to all of you today. From my perspective, of course. So my name is Cindy Layton, and I'm a postdoc in the Department of Anesthesiology at Stony Brook University. We can go to the next slide. Thank you. So I wanted to give you a little bit of an overview of what my training has been like, which I would say it's been a little bit of a diverse experience. I started at the University of New Haven, where I received my undergraduate degree in as a bachelor's of science in biochemistry. And I started doing research by way of our psychology department, where I did a minor in research methods in psychology. So as a small project, I looked at the role of language in reading comprehension, particularly in bilingual individuals. And while I realized that psychology wasn't exactly the topic that I was interested, what it did do was give me sort of like a push into the world of research and methodology. And so with my interest in clinical research and biomedical science, I went over to the Yale School of Medicine, just like 10 minutes away from the University of New Haven, and I had the privilege of working in the obstetrics and gynecology department in the clinical research team, looking at what kind of effects or what kind of factors influence pregnancy and birth disorders. And so after that experience, I essentially realized that I didn't want to be a physician and that I really enjoyed the aspects of research even further. And it kind of confirmed what my initial hunch was. So I started applying to summer internship programs, and that's how I landed here at Stony Brook through a summer internship program where I did my first bench research in the laboratory of Dr. Holly Colignato, who ended up subsequently being my PhD thesis advisor. In between my undergrad and my PhD, I actually did a postdoc at the National Institutes of Health at the National Cancer Institute, where I further developed more bench work. So in my my summer research experience at Stony Brook, I worked on a lot of molecular events that regulate brain development. But then I wanted to get some more biochemistry experience on my postdoc, so I went and worked on lung cancer and learned more about that signaling mechanisms there. And by the time I came back to Stony Brook to do my PhD, that's where I sort of settled on the idea of studying brain development further. And the reason, I guess, why I'm describing a lot of these different experiences and my trajectory in detail is because I kind of want to show you that you don't necessarily have to pigeonhole yourself to a specific field. You don't have to pigeonhole yourself to anything really in particular. You have to kind of look for the diversity of thought in the different fields that you might be interested in. And eventually you might want to build a specialization into something. And I feel like that's sort of where my PhD really started taking off, when I sort of decided on a specific topic, and I had already considered many different types of model systems and different types of studies, like, for example, looking at things in the clinical setting versus like in a mouse model and things like that. And I realized that a lot of these terminology may be more applicable to people in life sciences, and I realized that a lot of you might be more in the engineering or other types of fields. So I'll just quickly mention that what I'm trying to say is that, you know, there's a lot of different type of training that you can do all the way up into your PhD. So that will help you when you try to form an idea of what you want for your postdoc. So when I started thinking about my postdoc, you know, given that I had this very sort of diverse experience of topics, you know, even leading into my PhD, it kind of all came to a big coalesce in the fall semester of 2013, which was the semester in which I was writing my thesis, and I was writing up my paper, and I was also looking for a postdoc. So there were a lot of things in my mind all happening at the same time. And earlier, Liv mentioned the importance of putting together a calendar of all your different deadlines and all the different things you have to do. That is exactly how I was able to get through that semester. I made a calendar where I went through all of the deadlines of the graduate school. So when you needed to submit your abstract for your thesis, when you needed to, have your committee meeting, when, so on and so forth. I put that into the calendar, and then I worked my way backwards. So I knew that I wouldn't want to interview for postdocs at the same time that I would be nearing those deadlines, which are very stressful. So I sort of gave myself time to look for a postdoc, to start sending out cover letters and resumes and CVs and the whole nine. So that way I would have a certain type of schedule set for myself ahead of time. And I had let the people that I was interested in working with, the future potential postdoctoral candidate labs, that this was sort of my timeline. And I think to them that actually was good that they knew that, because not only did they knew my status, so they knew that I was finishing up my paper, and they knew that I was writing my thesis, and they knew that I was pretty much at the very end of my PhD, so it gave them confidence in knowing that here's a person who's finishing up, and they're really interested in talking to us about their work and how it would relate to ours. So I got I would say that I sent out my CV to, I think, about 5 or 6 labs initially. And those were really people that I knew that that they were in my immediate field. So first of all, I decided based on topic that I wanted to stay within the area of the brain, because that's what I had done my PhD on. But I wasn't limiting myself as to what. So before in my PhD, I had done a lot of work in brain development. I didn't necessarily need to go to a developmental lab. I thought, I just want to learn something else about the brain. I wanted to kind of, again, diversify my way of thinking about this organ that's so important to us, right? So as I started looking for topics, I kind of ran across someone else who was already in a different department but at Stony Brook also, and I interviewed in his laboratory, I believe, 5 days after I defended my dissertation in December of that fall semester. And I also did 2 other interviews at 2 other places. And then basically I scheduled all my interviews after I had done my defense because I think, number one, I felt more comfortable knowing that I had already kind of gotten over the hunch of the defense. And the other thing that it did for me was that it sort of confidence-wise, I felt if I had already been able to give my presentation in front of my peers and my audience here at the university, that I would then feel more comfortable going outside of that to other places to give a talk similar to that. In other words, the postdoc job talk. And so I probably set the interviews a few days apart. I think they were about 3 or 4 or 5 days apart. So they were all kind of back to back. And the reason why I liked that was because I was able to kind of consider one lab and then go to the next one and then consider that lab and then go to the next one and then consider the next one. And then at the end of that little tour, I felt like I had gathered so much information, and I took a few days to think about it, and it all sort of ended up working out where I made a decision. So let's go to the next slide. Thank you. What I wanted to go over in terms of what I think is important for people to take into consideration when they're picking a postdoctoral training laboratory is to think of your postdoc as a continuation of your training. So you might want to carefully consider what are the strengths that you have right now? What are the things that make you unique in the way that you are productive, in the way that you see the world, and the way that you kind of interpret the scientific question at hand? And what you want to then explore is how will this next training in this candidate lab that you're considering build on that? Will it expose you? Will it give you access? Will it put other things into perspective for you that will add on to that? And that's a very important thing to consider because that makes you in itself consider the types of resources that are available to you at that institution as well as that in that lab. I want to kind of mention that topic is not necessarily everything. So I think a lot of people sometimes say like, oh, I'm really interested in this one topic and I only want to go to places where they study this one topic. I have seen people make that mistake because they have considered topics so heavily that they haven't considered everything else about the environment in that particular institution as a factor of the success that they would have. So topic is very important. As I said, you want to consider all these different aspects of your strengths and the type of training that you want to receive. But I think that hand in hand with the topic is making sure that you identify a place that's good for you. A place that's good for you might not be good for me and might not be good for someone else. So you have to ask yourself what it is that you want to get out of it and make sure that that place that you choose is going to give you that. One thing that I did a lot was I talked to several mentors. So there were people like, my advisor, my committee members, other professors who I had built a nice relationship with over time that I was here. I asked a lot of people, what should I be looking to get out of this postdoc? And that's something that's also pretty individual. Again, it has to do with building on your strengths, on your training, and things you want to get out of it and that are relevant to you particularly, and sometimes even field-specific, right? So you want to ask those people, what should I be looking for in making my decision? And that's how you will be able to kind of set yourself up for making a very clear, logical, and also intuitive decision. I think that there's a lot of information that I probably won't even need to mention because most of you probably did this when you were even looking for labs that you wanted to join for your PhD thesis. But there's a lot of research of your own that goes into identifying the information of the background and of the laboratories. You'll find that you'll be able to get so much information once you go to interviews, and you'll be able to make that decision more carefully. I think one thing you also want to consider is that you should see yourself as an autonomous agent, I call it, with an independent mission, meaning that if the next leap after your postdoc is to become an independent investigator, whether it's in academia or in industry or in any other place that you go after this, you are going to have a mission which is based upon what you addressed earlier, which are those strengths, that training that you want to build on. So if you start to see yourself as this person, as this agent, where you are an individual that needs a certain type of thing that is going to be specific to you, training specific to you, things that are specific to you, that is one way to look at this process, that you have to think almost a little bit selfishly. And I know sometimes it's hard for us to do that, but it's important for you to consider that. I think that you also sometimes have to play devil's advocate, because sometimes you might feel like, oh, but it just felt so good to be in that lab interviewing with people and talking to them. I think sometimes it's important for you to take a step back from that and think of all the different factors that are going to play into your decision. So within a certain lab, look for the success stories. Look for the people who have gone there and who have exited, and where are they now? Are they now faculty members? Are they now in industry somewhere? And do any of those people match a similar profile to one that you have had in terms of, can you see yourself going through this training and also being successful? Not every lab is going to have that, especially if it's a younger investigator and maybe someone who hasn't had, a whole bunch of postdocs go through their own lab. So obviously that's not going to be the most informative thing, but I think you might want to ask around when you're at the interview to other people that already work there, like other postdocs or current graduate students or collaborators or anything like that, about what they can say about that lab. When you go to that interview, you also want to identify resources they offer. So some of the resources that were available to me here at Stony Brook, and the reason why I decided to stay here, so going back to how I made my decision, was that I'm a minority student. And so for me, the ability to be connected to people who understand the issues that minority students face, it's important to me. And it's important for me to have a connected population of people who I can go to when I need help. And I know that they are reliable and they will help me out. And so there is a center here at Stony Brook called the Center for Inclusive Education, which houses several different fellowship opportunities, as well as many professional development programs. And when I was making my decision to come here to Stony Brook, I actually applied to one of those postdoctoral fellowships, and actually I was accepted. And so that made it so that when I was making my decision, I had already been sort of given an offer by this lab here at Stony Brook, and at the same time I had been given this additional package with a postdoctoral fellowship. And so that obviously tilted my decision a little bit. Why? Because having money gives you power to make decisions once you are at that particular institution. And, so over the past year or so, my laboratory has struggled to get funding for research. And I have found it so incredibly beneficial that I have this postdoctoral fellowship, because it has not cut my time short at this particular laboratory, whereas others have had to sort of scramble and try to figure out what is my next step. And so having or being able to apply to fellowships at the same time, I know it sounds overwhelming, and I know it sounds like, oh my God, yeah, another thing on my to-do list, but I think it's important for you to think about what kind of resources does that institution offer you, so that if you are not eligible for fellowships right now, and maybe you will be once you're in that institution, what internally can they offer you to recruit you and keep you there and make sure that you're successful. And so, weigh out the pros and the cons of everything and take your time doing this. Don't rush yourself, because I think it's important for you to weigh out every single thing that's important to you and make sure it's addressed. One thing that I think I did well and has served me well since I joined, I've been at this postdoc for about a little over a year and a half. And one thing that I did really well was within the first month that I was here, I generated this short and long-term training plan, where I kind of addressed, like, in the first 3 months, I want to get a fellowship application out to, I submitted one to the American Heart Association. And even though it wasn't funded, what it did do was it was a great exercise to learn my new topic in this new lab. It also made me sort of work more cohesively with my advisor. So we kind of early on established like a culture of how do we work together. It also made me sort of think about what my scientific questions were going to be. And it made me ask questions to my colleagues who were here. And it made me dive into the preliminary data that the lab already had. And so it was a really good plan, because it also, within the application, you kind of have to do a plan for yourself. You kind of have to sell, like, oh, I'm going to, do this experiment, and it's going to happen in this timeline, and so on and so forth. So I think the training plan can go hand in hand with the fellowship that you might apply to. but I would definitely recommend do one or the other, if not both, because it'll really help you to see what are your resources around you, how are you going to accomplish the questions that you want to ask. So with that, I would be happy to take any questions later on, and I will turn it over back to Liz. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Cindy. And our next speaker is Dr. Herbert Geller, who is with the NIH Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute.
Okay, so let's go full screen. So with that, I just want to introduce myself. I'm here as both a scientist and the head of the Office of Education, which means that I'm in charge of mentoring and training for about 300 fellows here at NHLBI, in addition to running my own lab. And so we do have a lot of interest in helping people find the right postdoc. And the first question that I would always ask any graduate student looking for a postdoc is, what are your career goals? Because a postdoc has to be a step on the way to get to where you want to go. And so if you don't know where you want to go, you're never going to get there. And so I've listed here a bunch of career goals which we find for our fellows here at NIH. The first, obviously, is an academic position, and they can be at several different types of institutions. So, for example, if you want to be a principal investigator and run your own lab, you would do that at a research-intensive university or a government lab. On the other hand, you can also find a job in a primarily teaching institution where you would be dealing with a lot of undergraduate and perhaps graduate students as another career path. Industry research, big pharma and the biotech industry have lots of jobs, and lots of postdocs find employment in the biotech industry and like it. And finally, many postdocs and many graduate students find that non-research careers, which take advantage of their training in graduate education, are also advantageous. So, for example, in government, you can do research administration. You can work at the FDA, where they employ many scientists that are in the drug approval process. Patent law, tech transfer are incredibly important these days. Science policy, consulting, the salespeople. Lots of the salespeople who come to your labs are really technical experts in their area and find a lot of joy in helping people do their science through their products rather than doing the science themselves. Finally, you could be an entrepreneur and start your own company. But whatever you want to be, each of these has their own particular set of requirements to get there. And so your postdoc is to help you get there. And the next slide really says that each requires a particular skill set. And if we think about what a postdoc is, it's a temporary and defined period of mentor training. And so the training needs to be towards a goal. And so in the next few slides, what I'll go over are these goals that I've said are potential goals and what you need to get there. So, for example, let me stop a little and go back and remind you that you do a postdoc to get you to your goals. If you don't have a goal, then you may not need a postdoc. You want to acquire skills, you want to acquire credentials, and you want to make a network. These are all important in terms of what you want to do next. And so where you go depends upon what you want to gain. And then finally, the question, do I even need a postdoc, is something we'll address at the end. So let's say you want to be a principal investigator. If you want to be a PI and you want to get hired to run your own lab, what is the most important thing that people are going to look at you for? What they're going to look at you for is that you have a significant research project of your own. And so you want to go to a lab where it gives you the skills that you needed to not only develop your own research project, but to attack it. But in addition, you'll need communication skills. You need to be able to write papers and grant applications. You'll you'll need to do oral presentations and learn how to do that, and you'll want to make a network. And you'll need to have management skills in terms of personnel, mentoring, and budgeting. So you want to think about a lab that will give you those particular sets of skills. What if your goal is to be a research university faculty member? They're same as a principal investigator, but there you also need teaching skills because you'll be asked to spend some time in the classroom. I will also point out that you don't necessarily need teaching experience. Our fellows here at NIH, as a research institution, do not get a lot of teaching experience, but they do compete successfully for faculty positions. You'll need to have interpersonal skills because being a faculty member, which I was for 30 years before coming to NIH, requires a lot of interactions with your deans, your chairs, students, and other faculty, and management skills as well. What if I want to be a college teacher? And a college teacher, teaching is a primary requirement, so you really want to have an ability to get some teaching experience, but many colleges also expect research, but the kinds of research they expect involve students. So you need to develop a research project, if this is your goal, that can be done by students. So for example, Drosophila mutant screening. It's a great way to give a lot of undergraduates a lot of experience in research by screening for mutants that you can then build your research career on. But again, this is different than for other careers. Industry research. If you want to go into industry, the primary qualifications are scientific. They really want you for your scientific skills. They want you to show that you can solve problems, and they are looking for people with a wide range of technical skills because, as I say in the next paragraph, team science is the norm in industry. It's not, I'm the PI, I'm running my own show. Is in industry, we are part of a team trying to accomplish something. So you need to have really good interpersonal interaction skills. You need to be able to gain writing skills because you'll be wanting to ask that your project is the one that gets advanced. Management skills, here you need to be able to manage both up and down. It's not like you're in charge of your own lab. You'll need to talk to your supervisor, whether it's a vice president of research, to fund your research and convince others to help you do your research and get the job done. You'll need budget and personnel skills as well. Other skills include, other goals could be research administration or scientific policy. These take advantage of all of your research skills in terms of being able to be a thinker and the ability to understand broad areas of research, understand emerging areas of science. So you need to have you can't be too narrowly focused if you want to go into science policy or research administration. You have to be broadly focused, which is very different from what you want to be if you want to be a PI. Again, here, communication skills are always important, and organizational skills. If you can show, for example, that you can arrange a meeting, you can interact with various kinds of people, these will help you compete for a job as a science policy or in research administration. Now, what about if you don't want to do research? And then the question is, do you really need a postdoc at all? So many scientifically trained people go into patent law or consulting, and they do so without even going through a postdoc. On the other hand, if you talk to law firms that are hiring science advisors and send them to law school, they often want people with postdoctoral experience because the kinds of patent issues that they deal with require advanced training. Grants administration, science policy, and tech transfer, all of which ostensibly don't require postdoctoral training, all benefit from postdoctoral experience, but again, you want to be in a lab which is going to give you a pathway to those jobs by giving you ability to have communication, negotiation, and interpersonal interactions. So what do you do to find a postdoc? And I think Cindy said many of this, but I think it's worth going over this. Number one, start very early. Define your career goals as soon as you possibly get a sense of what you want to do. Talk to your mentor, network, ask for recommendations, and know your style. Do you like a big lab or a small lab? Do you want to stay at the bench? Do you want to develop your own research project? So you need to have the idea, if you want to do that, that a lab is successful in letting people do that. Do you like a lot of interaction, or do you prefer to work on your own? Do you like to play with big machines? People who come to NIH, for example, love to play with all the big machines we have here, but other people are content to work in a more restricted environment. When you do decide that, you then have to evaluate the lab success and training people in that area. Now, for science, you want to look at publications, and you have to be very careful here about how you look at publications, because many labs have great publications. The PI has a great publication record, but they're due to only a small subset of postdocs because the lab has a goal of only publishing in these, quote, CNS journals, and if you fail to get your paper into a CNS journal, you're not considered successful. So you need to have a lab which, again, matches your style and can give you the experience that you need. You've got to meet the PI. Obviously, if you meet them in a meeting, you need to know who they are, what kind of a person they are, that you can get along with them. You want to talk to current and previous trainees about the lab environment, about what they felt were the positive experiences, what were the successes, and even many labs, you can talk, the fellows in the lab will tell you about potential failures, fellows who left the lab for various reasons, and then you can see if those reasons are meaningful to you or not. I would always tell you, never accept a postdoc position without a lab visit. Now, I have to say, even in my own experience, we've taken postdocs without a lab visit, but only after an extensive period of interaction where we've had video conferences back and forth with both me and the potential postdoc and people in the lab and the potential postdoc. Because that gives you, the lab visit really gets you a chance and interact to see how the lab functions. I always want people to talk to other people in the lab without the PI being around as a minder. I think it's really important that you get a sense of how the people in the lab feel about the lab without the PI telling them. Soft skills development. Obviously, if you want to develop your own research project, you want to make sure that the lab is conducive to that. If you want to do grant writing, you want to make sure it's available to you. If you want to do teaching, mentoring, learn management skills, these are something that you want to make sure that the lab can give you. And then I do think that lab funding is important. You don't want to move into a lab and then find out that their grant is ending next year, and then you've got to find another position. So, while Cindy emphasized the importance of fellowships, and I think fellowships are really important and help you along, I still would not want to depend on my fellowship in a lab that didn't have decent funding. And then again, I echo what Cindy said, which is take your time. Don't rush into this, because this is a major decision. It's one that's going to be with you for quite a while, and so you want to take your time and evaluate options. And I think with that, we can move on to the question and answer period.
The first question is actually for Dr. Geller. The question is, what if you are not completely sure what you want to do for a future career, but know that you really like doing research? You don't necessarily have specific goals, so how do you narrow down your postdocs?
That's a really interesting decision, but I think if you really know that you're interested in research, then we've already narrowed down the career options. And one potential career option that, for example, I didn't put on is the position which we have here at NIH called the staff scientist, where you may not want to run your own lab, but you get to do science all the time. And I think the equivalent in academics might be a research assistant professor or research professor where you're in someone else's lab. So I think in that case, I would just pick the lab that does the research that excites you most and say, if it's a good lab, the research is exciting to me, maybe I don't have to develop my own research project, that the lab will give me a chance to do research and sort things out.
Great. I have a quick question from someone who heard an acronym that they wanted spelled out. So what is the meaning of a CNS publication?
Science, Nature, and Cell.
Okay.
So in other words, there are PIs who only insist that their postdocs publish in single-name journals, and if the work isn't good enough for a single-name journal, then they don't get any publications at all.
Okay. A question for Cindy. I was wondering how graduating in December impacted your application options as opposed to a spring or May graduation.
I defended in December, but I didn't actually graduate until May. That said, I think part of the reason why I wanted to defend in December was because I wanted to give myself time to make a decision about what laboratory I would go to. And so a lot of what I ended up negotiating happened in the subsequent months after my defense. So between January and February and even into March was a lot of time of, I did my interviews, and then one of the places I actually went back for a second interview because I wanted to get a little more information and talk to some more people. And I think that's what I mean by not rushing it. I rushed myself to defend because I needed to just do it. And I think in some ways it was good that I got my paper written up, and, the paper kind of goes into the thesis. So, I got my thesis finished, and then I finished defending. So I think that kind of gave me confidence that if I was going to go interview places, I had already finished. So to answer the question, it didn't really limit me too much, and instead it kind of opened some doors, because I think for some positions, for some fellowships, if you haven't already defended or you don't have a set date for graduation, that can hurt you. So there are some fellowships where you need to know that it's going to be May or December or whatever date. And then once you submit the application, you actually later on have to provide proof that your, diploma has been awarded as of X, semester. So I think it's actually a good idea for you to plan out ahead of time how you want to go about the whole process of your defense, of your job interviews, of, your publications, and so on and so forth, because then it makes you have a clearer picture of what you can offer that incoming postdoc, what your timeline is going to be. So because I knew I was going to be done in May, I was able to say to everyone I was interviewing with, I cannot start before May. And so we have ample time to co-write, to write fellowships, or to explore different topics, or to have more conversations, or so on and so forth. So I think that was kind of the advantage. And like I said, I would recommend you give yourself enough time.
And I also see in the chat a follow-up question to that, which is, did you use the spring semester to write your papers and then interview? And was that something that you had to negotiate with your PI?
I had written like 95% of my paper. So what I was doing in the spring was doing some follow-up experiments that were a little bit technically difficult, and we needed them before I submitted my paper. So in the time that I was doing those experiments, I was sort of still making edits to my manuscript, and I mostly spent time kind of like finishing out my interviews and, determining what I wanted to do, considering which fellowships I should apply to and when. So it basically just gave me a lot of time to think and to kind of organize what was going to be the next step for me, because I knew for sure that even though I was staying at the same institution, I was going to a completely different lab. So I knew that if revisions came back, so I ended up submitting my paper for publication actually after I had already started my postdoc, because it took us a long time to finish those experiments that I was talking about earlier. So I think for every person it might be a little different, but I think that spring semester just gave me time, once the defense is out of the way, you have all this time to finish up projects, to finish your publications or your reviews, like whatever it is that you need to work on. I feel like the defense pushes you to write so much, so you're already in like a writing zone. So it's a good idea to kind of continue that writing zone from there on and finish your manuscripts and everything else you have going on.
Okay. We have another question for Professor Geller. And it is, when emailing a professor inquiring about possible postdoc opportunities, what should the style of the email be? How long should it be? Should you also send some papers or a CV, or should I send those separately? Kind of, what's a good kind of template for emailing those professors an inquiry?
I think, first of all, you should realize that people like to get these kinds of inquiries because you've chosen them. And so it's kind of flattering to get somebody writing to you saying you're interested in a postdoc in your lab. And so I would say what you really want to put into your email is what in particular about the lab interests you and how you think that you would be a good, that you could benefit from being in that lab. And that can be in one paragraph in the email. And of course, yes, you include your CV, and it wouldn't hurt to attach publications. The person can either read them or not. And so I think the more information you can provide at that point, I think you're better off.
All right, here's a final question. From a PI's perspective, what do you look most for in a potential postdoc? And any of you can take that.
I mean, from my point of view, what I look most at is an excitement for science and somebody who has a decent record of achievement in their graduate work. Those are the things that are really important to me. Somebody who really looks like they have potential for a real interest and a commitment to doing good science.
Great.
I totally agree. I think I have never myself hired a postdoc or anything like that, but I think that what PIs talk about, what I hear about is that sense of, does this person sound like a leader? Does it sound like someone I could trust to make decisions about their experiments, about their studies, about the people they work with? In other words, is it someone that really shows potential for growing into whatever they want to grow into? It doesn't necessarily always have to be into a faculty position. It could be into anything. But that PI basically wants to know that their time and their investment is going to be worthwhile, and so they're looking for helping you continue that training. And you just have to show a lot of different traits that show leadership, show, someone who's knowledgeable, responsible, etc.